Hello everyone and welcome. Today I want to go through a few games played by Bobby Fischer in the year 1977. And surprisingly, he actually played a few games against an engine or a computer known as the Greenblatt program, created by Richard Greenblatt. It was a chess program that was estimated at the time to be around 2300 ELO, although having gone through the games, I suspect a 2300 ELO in 1977 is not equivalent to 2300 these days. But this is the story of how Bobby Fischer destroyed one of the first chess programs. So let's take a look at some of the games. So it's believed Bobby actually submitted 3 games against this program. There were probably many more. However, maybe these are the best games out of the bunch. But in the first game, Bobby Fischer is playing with the white pieces and the Greenblatt program is playing with black. And I believe these moves were submitted via fax. Bobby began the game with e4, black played e5, and we get into a king's gambit with f4. So Fischer straight away going in for the jugular. Black took on f4, Bobby played bishop to c4, and now the computer decided to play the move d5, opening up the position for their bishop. And white took on d5 and black played knight to f6, attacking the bishop on d5 twice. So white defends with the knight, and black again attacks the defender on c3 with the bishop. Fischer now played knight to f3. Obviously he wasn't worried about bishop takes knight in this situation, because then he just simply takes with the pawn, develops the bishop, and if black takes twice here, I think you can take with the queen. Queen takes queen, queen takes queen, pawn takes will just be absolutely fine for white, and white's got a very pleasant position. So in the game, actually black castled kingside and Fischer also castled. Black now took the time to take on d5, so took off the powerful bishop, knight takes d5, but now white takes on d5, has a nice knight in the centre, hits the bishop on b4. Now the best move for black, according to Stockfish in this position, black must play f5 to keep the balance, but it's actually quite a complicated position, because if white takes the bishop on b4, black has f takes e4, and moves like queen to d4 with check are coming in once this knight moves from f3. So white's best move is actually c3 in this position, and black can win the piece back, and queen takes f3, keeps a rather balanced position. But in the game, the Greenblatt program played the wrong move. Bishop to d6 was played, protecting their pawn on f4. So why is this so bad? Well, it's because now Fischer played an excellent move, d4, gaining control of the centre, prepares e5, e5 is coming, the bishop and the knight also attack f4. It's going to be very difficult for black to defend the position. And the computer played, I think, a very bizarre move. Played g5, so obviously wanting to defend the pawn on f4, but by playing g5 you just completely sacrifice the safety of the king. And Fischer now comes up with a genius tactic, just plays knight takes g5. The queen takes on g5, so white sacrificed the piece, but now comes e5. The point being now this bishop doesn't really have any squares to go to, so it's attacked, and also this pawn on f4 is also attacked at the same time. In the game, black played bishop to h3, threatening checkmate on g2, but Fischer just simply played rook to f2, defends the pawn, and black still got to make a decision about this bishop. If it went to e7, then comes bishop takes f4, which hits the queen, the only defender of the bishop. Let's say queen h4 to keep control of the bishop, then white can play g3. The queen has to move somewhere, let's say queen to g4, and white will just take on e7 with check. A very easy game for whites. Back in the game then, black basically had to give up their bishop. Black played bishop takes e5, Fischer recaptured, threatens moves like knight to f6 now, and to be honest, white's got a dominant position. Also, if the queen ever moves off the g-file, the bishop is still under attack. Black played c6 in the game, but now white takes on f4. Queen went back to g7 to maintain this pin, but after knight to f6 check, the king has to move. and now comes queen to h5. Threatens the bishop and also threatens ideas of queen takes h7. The bishop does have to move. Let's say bishop to e6 though. I think Fischer would have played bishop to h6 and attacks the queen and hits the rook at the same time. And black can resign this position. So back to the game. Instead of moving the bishop away, the Greenblatt program played rook to d8. And Fischer just took on h3. Queen takes bishop. White's now a full piece up. The knight went to a6. And Fischer finished off with rook to f3. Threatens rook to g3. Black played queen to g6 to hit the pawn on c2. Fischer played a very nice move, just rook to c1, defends the pawn. And after king to g7, there was rook to g3, pinning the queen against the king. This is game over now. Rook to h8 was played, and Fischer found a beautiful mate in one with queen to h6. Checkmate. And to be honest, Fischer tore the Greenblatt program apart in that game. So on to another game then between Greenblatt and Fischer. In this game, Fischer was playing with black and the program had white. So the game began with 1 to e4. Fischer played the Sicilian. Knight to f3, it was d6, d4, takes, knight to f6 hits the pawn, knight c3 defends the pawn. Fischer played a6 to stop any bishop b5 or knight b5 ideas. Bishop went to e2 and Fischer played e5. Hits the knight on d4, forces white to retreat it backwards, and Fischer played bishop to e7 to develop. White played bishop to e3. Black castled. There was queen to d3, bishop to e6, and white castled with Fischer playing knight b to d7. So a fairly standard game so far, equal for both sides. White now jumped in with knight to d5, and Fischer played rook to c8, with black now giving up the dark squared bishop. Knight takes e7 was played, queen takes e7. This d6 pawn looks very weak, but Stockfish actually gives this as about +4/+5 for black in this situation. Because moves like bishop to c4 are now coming, and this pawn on e4 is very weak. In the game, white played f3, and black does have a weakness on d6, so Fischer fixes this by playing d5. If e takes d5 in this situation, black can just play knight takes d5. After bishop to f2, there's knight to f4. A brilliant position for black. The queen's attacked, the bishop's attacked, queen g5 is coming with ideas of mate on g2. In the game, white played knight to d2 instead, but now Fischer gains an initiative here. Queen to b4 hits the b2 pawn. Knight jumps back to b3, so white's moves aren't really making a lot of coherent sense. Fischer takes on e4. If pawn takes e4 in this situation, bishop c4 is devastating, because if queen goes backwards, there's takes, queen takes e4. Black's just an easy pawn up with moves like rook to c2 coming in straight away. In the game then, after d takes e4, the queen dropped back to d1. Fischer played knight to d5, hits the bishop. The bishop goes to a7, a very bizarre move, reminiscent of the Fischer-Spassky game where he lost his bishop in the corner. Maybe the computer was mocking him, I have no idea. But anyway, b6, and now this bishop's just completely locked in on a7. So then white played c3, which hits the queen, but Fischer drops back his queen to e7, and a discovered attack against this bishop. Finally, white regained a pawn on e4. The knight's forced to move, goes to e3 though, forks the queen and the rook, and to be honest, white's position's just completely fallen apart here. The queen went to d3, Fischer picks up the free rook. The queen took on a6, surprisingly, and Fischer just dropped the knight back to e3. The bishop has escaped, bishop takes b6 was played, but Fischer plays queen to g5, threatening mate on g2. g3 is played to stop the mates, but now Fischer starts harassing the queen. Rook to a8 hits the queen, and the program now played bishop to a7 to block the rook. And Fischer just got on with his own attack. He plays h5, preparing h4 and destroying these two pawns that protecting the king. Queen b7 was played, h4 now to destroy these pawns. King went to f2, h takes g3, h takes g3, and Fischer opens up the position with f5, trying to open his rook up against white's king. There's e takes f5, rook takes f5 check, king hides on e1, and to be honest, black can pretty much play anything here. He can play knight check, queen takes g3 check, looks good. Instead he opted for doubling the rooks. The rook goes to f8, king to d2, knight to c4 check, king went to c2, queen to g6, preparing a discovery. The queen goes back, knight to d6 hits the queen jumps into c6, and now the discovery works once again. Rook f2 check, the king hides on d1, bishop to g4, after a few more moves, bishop takes f2, queen to d3 check, this bishop pins the bishop on e2, the king goes to c1, now bishop takes e2, the queen to d1 is mate, so knight to d2 is forced, rook takes f2, with ideas of rook to f1. And quickly, after queen takes d7, Fischer finds that move with ease. Knight takes, and queen to d1 is checkmate. So again, Fischer pretty much destroys white with the black pieces. And in the final game we're going to look at, it's another Sicilian. So Fischer's playing black once again. Greenblatt played e4, Fischer played c5, knight to f3, but now Fischer changed it up a bit, he plays g6. After d4, bishop g7, knight c4, takes. We're into what's known as the sniper or the pterodactyl defense. And black plays knight to c6, hits the knight twice, forcing white to make a decision. He defends the knight on d4 with the bishop. But now black just develops knight to f6, there was knight takes c6, pawn takes, e5 hits the knight, and the best move in this position is just to drop the knight backwards to g8 and redevelop it. f4 was played, and now Fischer plays a very French-esque move, f6, destroying the structure in the centre. Pawn takes f6, the knight redevelops to f6, bishop c4 to stop black castling, but black can play d5, regains the centre, hits the bishop, forces it to drop back, and black played rook to b8, hits the pawn on b2. So white plays b3, but now this bishop suddenly opens up, hits the knight, hits the rook at the same time. There could become some tactics against this. And to be honest, there is straight away knight to g4. Hits the bishop, but also the bishop now hits the knight on c3. For this reason, white's forced to play bishop to d4. Fischer though plays e5. Hits the bishop and destroys the structure. F takes e5 was played, and black doesn't really need to worry here. They can regain this pawn at any moment. So black decides to castle. This stops white from castling, and it looks like black's given up the knight on g4. But after bishop takes g4, Fischer plays queen to h4 with check, g3. Fischer regains his piece, but there's a queen trade, and white plays rook to f1. And you'll see the bar swinging heavily in black's favour. And it's actually quite an even game in this position. If white played h3, then bishop d7, castle queenside. This is dead even for both sides, and the computer would have actually had a decent game. Instead, after rook to f1 in this position, after rook takes f1, king takes, Fischer finds a very nice move here. I wonder if you can find it. Maybe pause the video for a few seconds and see if you can discover what it is. But Fischer played c5. Hits the bishop. The point is though, after bishop takes c5, if this happened, then bishop takes e5 would win the knight. There's no way to defend this because your bishop can't come to b4. And if the knight moves, the rook gets taken. In the game, bishop to f2 was played. Bishop takes e5. And white is forced to defend the knight with bishop to e1. So this is a terrible position for white to be in. And Fischer quickly gains the initiative. Rook to f8 check, king went to g2, and now a very nice move. Rook to f3. Hits the knight twice, and the knight can't really move because then again the rook gets taken. h3 hits the bishop, so white is trying. But Fischer plays the best move, rook takes c3. The bishop takes the rook. The bishop takes the bishop. The bishop now attacks the rook, forcing white to move the rook away to f1. But now black's got the two bishops for the rook. Bishop to f5. And after rook to f2 and h5, I believe Fischer is just basically playing with his food here, because he's got a very nice central pawn that he could try and manoeuvre into to get a queen. And these two bishops, once they jump into moves like e4 and d4, are going to be monstrous. So let's see how the game continued. It was rook to e2, the king jumps into f7, the rook attacks the bishop, bishop hits the rook, rook to f3, king comes up, c3 and then bishop to e5, and white is probably going to lose the game. Fischer gets his pawns going, d4, takes, rook e1, d3 push, h4, d2, and yeah, this is quite simple now. You're just going to get your king into the position, and Fischer hoovers up the game nicely with this finish. Bishop to h3, king takes rook, gets a queen, and finishes the game with mate on g2. So Fischer played 3 games against the Greenblatt program, proving that at the time AI or chess engines were just not up to World Championship strength at this moment in time. But as we all know, they do get stronger, especially these days with Stockfish around. But anyway, that was some interesting games played by Fischer, and I believe it was his final games before he played Boris Spassky in his rematch in 1992, I believe it was. Anyway, thank you for watching my video. If you did enjoy, please consider leaving a like, a comment, or even subscribing, because it really helps with this YouTube algorithm. Anyway, thanks for watching.